South America. Well, I'm Hervé. I'm the head of research at EIPM, and I've got the pleasure to welcome you for a webinar on decarbonation, the three paths for sustainable change. So really, my goal is to, take you through, some of the key practice that can take us to, decarbonation. So not just measuring, but also, finding ways to reduce carbon emissions. So this is the result of a research project we've conducted with Maxiglass, who's in charge of procurement and supply management in a company called Savils. And we've been interviewing quite a number of people in procurement position, companies who've been already investing quite a lot in terms of implementing decarbonation. Maxi might be joining us by the end of the webinar to say hello. She's got a meeting, so she won't be able to join for the beginning of the session. So a few words about EIPM. It's a school, global footprint. We have programs that are open to all publics, but we also have programs with companies, and we deliver some academy everywhere in the world. We're also research-driven. I'm the head of research at EIPM. And, we operate in 9 languages, and we train thousands of people every year. So, decarbonation, why the topic? Well, global warming. We have in the atmosphere some greenhouse gas, and that includes different types of gas and emissions, carbon, methane, and a few others. The big point is this is accumulating, and this is creating the global warming effect. If we don't do anything, we'll be on the red curve. And what does it mean? This means that we will have warmer temperature, rising sea levels, and more and more of these disastrous climatic events that we can see on a regular basis. So there was the Paris Agreement that took us to a commitment to stay below the 1.5 degree. This is the blue curve. And that's quite of a radical change, in a context of economic growth, to be able to, go on that blue curve. So countries, companies, everyone needs to contribute to deliver both policies, but also actions in order to reduce emissions and decarbonize our product and supply chains. Something probably important to have in mind, we will be going through systemic threats in any case. Going through a decarbonation process means that we need to reinvent the foundation of industries as we know them, all the technology that have been invented more than 100 years ago, like, the type of energy we're using, the raw materials we're using. We need to completely, reinvent this product so we can have decarbonized solutions. In some industry, decarbonation will be synonym of a complete industry change. We start to see some of the automotive companies splitting in 2 groups. One of them focusing on, traditional energy and oil, and others, moving to the electric segment. So that's major impact on many industries. It will also change the job landscape. We won't be able to decarbonize without having massive investment in the circular economy, being able to reduce, but also remanufacture, repurpose, or recycle elements, components, raw materials in product. And this means a lot of people will need to be trained and, support this type of circular economy that's emerging. And this is quite of a significant, change from the job landscape, on top of all, the electricians, installers that we will be needing for this type of energy change. All this will create geopolitical dependencies. We all have heard about raw materials needed for batteries and other product, but also the amount of product that can be coming, the percentage of product coming from certain countries. So pretty important to to realize how much we'll be facing this kind of dependency in the future. Well, what if we don't do anything? Well, we'll have complete environmental impacts that will create, more and more massive supply chain disruptions that will also lead to social impact and people changing locations and uh, you know, geopolitical tension will also rise. And we need to invest in adaptation, being able to cope with warmer temperature and these climatic events. So, there'll be a lot of systemic threats and a lot of impact if we, don't act and don't go the decarbonation way. So best way forward is to decarbonize our supply chain. You might already have seen this picture. We tend to segregate the emissions in three scopes: scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emission. And you see on the picture, direct emissions coming from the company facilities and vehicles. You have scope 2 emissions that are more about energy and heat. And then scope 3 emission, you've got the upstream that are really the supply chain emissions, whatever's coming from your suppliers. And then, downstream type of activities when things go to the client. In terms of calculation of the footprint, very classically, we use tools that are compatible with the greenhouse gas protocol that help us to understand, the amount of emissions in scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. This is at the level of the complete company, and that's not at the product level. We'll come back on this point a bit later. What's important to have in mind is a lot of people think, decarbonation is about scope 3 emissions, but we also buy energy. We also, have a lot of purchase decisions that are going to impact facilities and vehicles used by the company. So our impact from a procurement standpoint is not just scope 3, but we're having impact on all of the scope. So for instance, here you've got some figures that are showing to what extent scope 3 is important. If you are in FMCG, fashion, food, automotive, you've got these 82, 83, 85, 90% of upstream and downstream emissions being in scope 3. But if you look at industry like cement, steel, mining, then scope 1 and 2 are very important in terms of the emission generated. And here, cement companies, there's a lot of investment for the electrification of vehicles operating in mines, transformation of the assets, factories that are used to, produce some of these raw materials. And here again, the role of procurement is clear, whatever scope we look at. In terms of reporting, scope 3 is very important for us. Okay, so today the purpose is to try to give you a perspective on the complete process we will need to reduce emissions. So I'll be describing that according to three paths to decarbonation, because depending on the context, we might not be using exactly the same approach and techniques. So if we are designing a product, we have to act right from the design stage in order to reduce and plan as much as possible to have the best scheme in order to have the lowest level of emissions. In other situation, we might be buying very standard product from the market, and here the design is done, it exists. So we need to be able to, select what will be the best solution for the future through a very classic procurement process. For more complex and customized product, let's say, you're buying cloud solutions, for instance, well, it's going to be a bit challenging when you understand to understand all the emission from the bottom of the data center to all the software that's being used in order to operate all that. So you will have a different way of measuring emissions, but also you'll integrate that more into your category strategy, in your relationship management approach with suppliers. So a different path, depending of what you buy. And I'll try to detail some of these a little bit more in the near future. Raising awareness, that's the first step. Oh yeah, I need to take you through a step first. So fairly important first step is to raise awareness. Today, if you look at your supplier base, even if you only look at the one that are important in terms of emissions, you probably have something like 70% of them who've never really heard about decarbonation, and they don't understand what will be the impact for them. So raising awareness is not just a nice to have type of support to supplier. That's absolutely essential to get anything started within your supply chain. Measuring emissions. This is not the the final end game. I would say it's a step into the process. We shouldn't be afraid sometime of working with maybe some approximative calculations, as long as we are clear about the right direction. But that's an important aspect, and I'll be coming back on this fairly soon. Emissions, measuring them helps to understand emission drivers. So what are the factors, the root cause, that are really creating these emissions? So we can work on eliminating these factors, this root cause, or reducing their impact. That can be done as part of upstream procurement. If we design product, this can be integrated into the procurement process or the early stages of the procurement process. Or for more complex product, this is something we integrate in category strategy, supplier relationship management. Out of this, we apply a number of decarbonation levers. I'll be coming back on this at a later stage. And the big challenge is to scale. I mentioned, we have a situation where we need to reinvent the energy, the raw material that have been invented many years ago. And this is absolutely essential to be able to quickly, build a new standard that will be low carbon solution and scale their availability rapidly in order to make sure that we can have a quick impact, because the clock is ticking, basically. So scaling and sometimes thinking differently about some of our actions in terms of the more systemic approach we need to have to market, we'll come back on this, is absolutely essential. So raising awareness, this is really about creating a supplier development program related to decarbonation. If you have the first, kind of assessment of your emissions using the greenhouse gas protocol, the software that can be available for that, you input all of your data in terms of spend, and you can provide also some figures in terms of weight of product, and it applies a certain factor that helps you to understand the emissions. So you're turning dollars into emissions, and you're turning weight of raw materials, for instance, into emissions. It's pretty inaccurate and rough, but that's enough today for reporting, and that's enough for setting priorities. Out of this, you can identify suppliers who've not yet made very strong commitment to decarbonize. Many very large companies have been making SBTi net zero commitment and have a roadmap, but a lot of smaller companies might not have yet made commitment. So it's important, to target your supplier development program to this group. You need to provide them with resources in terms of education, understanding, some of the more in-depth, some of the points I've been already describing, providing tools for assessing their emissions, toolbox that can help them to start to build roadmaps, and anything that can, help them to get started. The big point is don't reinvent the wheel. You can look, for instance, I've provided a link. You will get the presentation and you will get access to that link, the SME Climate Hub website, where you have plenty of these tools that can, free tools that can be used to start measuring, to start educating some of your suppliers. You can organize events, you can organize, create momentum with your supplier in order to get things going. And I think in the future could be very interesting to, identify opportunities to join forces, companies from the same industry who talk to the same supplier, going together for this education program. Or if you have a very local footprint, working with other company in your region, in your country, in order to support, specific decarbonation, education and decarbonation programs with your supplier. So look for opportunity to work together collaboratively. I think that's pretty important. Talking about collaboration, I saw my partner in crime who's been working with me on, putting together this presentation and working on with me on a report that we'll be producing very soon. Maxi, I'd like
Thank
to
you, Harry.
yourself. Well,
Thank you very much. And I'm very excited about the research we did. Very passionate about it. Should I just maybe give a background to myself?
yes, that'd be nice.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Maxi Glass. I'm heading the procurement for and supply management for Savills, the property management company. And I've been passionate about sustainability and all its subcomponents throughout my career. And I've been working with Herbie and EIPM for quite a long time now on various different research projects. So the last one is the decarbonization project, which I'm very excited about. I'm very excited about today's webinar and us sharing the first results with you.
Fantastic. Okay, let's get going. At a few point in times, we'll start to have some exchange with Maxi on some of the topic. So first step, raise awareness. Make sure there's good level of education, a good understanding of why we do it, and what are the first steps in terms of setting priorities and developing some of the earlier roadmap. Measuring the carbon footprint, I've been mentioning already the importance of reporting, but also priority setting. That's where we use, the average-based tool. We provide data into the system, and this transforms dollars or kilos into emissions. And mention, one of the tools that can be used here. Companies are using this to do their first assessment and reporting. This helps to set priorities. But going further requires to understand emissions at the level of the product and to be much more specific. So here we start to see the three paths for decarbonation. If you design or co-design a product, then you need to influence as much as possible this design from the very early stage, so you can reduce emissions, or you can think in terms, the solutions for recycling, for instance, or remanufacturing right from the design stage. Here, for that, you can use estimates based on life cycle analysis. You've got a number of databases that exist that can be plugged into computer-aided systems, or that can be, you can put your bill of materials into, let's say, software, and that provides you some estimate very quickly. You can make some change, ask the algorithm to provide you recommendation to lower some of the impact, some of the carbon. So that's really the way to go in terms of the design or the co-design of the product. Now, you might not be able to get all information that's going to be precise enough out of the system. So some companies like Volvo, for instance, for some of the product they co-design with supplier, they've been sending request to supplier to provide information, sometime on the broader product carbon footprint or their energy use, in order to better approximate what type of emissions come out of the complete product put together by a Volvo, for instance. So that's really, if you design the product, then you, from an early stage, you can use this database in order, that's been built out of life cycle analysis, and that really helps you to assess the impact and look at the best options for the future. If you buy something standard from the market, then you need to ask for EDP, environmental product declaration. And there's many sectors where it's by law in some countries a requirement to produce a number of information related to environmental impact. So this morning we had people asking us about nuts, bolts, and fasteners. It took me really a few minutes to go on internet, put into your favorite search engine, environmental product declaration, nuts, bolts, and probably you can just put the supplier, and then this will take you to a page where you will be getting some information. There's portals that are aggregating all that information. I think it's important to get close to people in the engineering groups in your company who are dealing with environmental assessment, in order to better understand what kind of access they already have to information. You can also ask supplier to provide provide some of these elements. I see a question about providing a few online tools for measuring. There's so basically, I'm not advertising any specific solutions, but I give you a free tool for the from the SME Climate Hub. If you're interested to look at something a bit more sophisticated for estimates, then you might be looking into Gabisfera, the Sfera suite of a product, which is interesting because it can also, give you perspective on costing as well. So it's an interesting suite. And there's another one which is more of a startup that's got some really nice user interface, which is called Makesite.io. But I'm sure there's more, and the sustainable tech landscape for procurement keeps evolving, and there will be more solutions. In a way or another, data comes from the same place, and this is typically universities or global associations that have been conducting life cycle assessments, and they release the data into the open. So these are kind of aggregator that helps to put the data into something that's easy to use. And there's plenty of portals for environmental product declaration. Probably if you look at some of the leading environmental agency inside your country, or maybe if you look at some of your industry association, you'll be able to get closer to some of this information in specific language. Yeah, I can put into the I could put a couple of links and send that to you. Again, I'm not advertising for any solution, but happy to share a couple of these. So, and finally, if you buy something more complex, customized, I don't know, if you're looking at, purchasing a complete building, a complete factory, if you're looking at purchasing cloud services, for instance, then, the game becomes much more complex, because you've got big infrastructure who are, operating differently, and it's quite difficult to get a sense of these emissions. So what's very important is companies who are putting together, this complex customized product. Well, they would typically invest in developing their own calculation. Hopefully, they would develop, common calculation that we see currently being done for the chemical industry. And what's important for you is to understand their maturity in terms of measurement, Are there any industry guidelines that are already existing? Are they, the supplier, qualified, certified, or do they use a company that's certified to do the life cycle assessment and this evaluation? And if they have methodology to provide you information on an ongoing basis, have these methodology used been verified and stamped as being, a good reflection of reality? It's not because it's verified, it's comparable with everyone in the industry, but at least, this give you, something quite reliable. And very important to push for each sector players to go into common standards in terms of measurement over time. Don't dream, there won't be a single database with everything at the fingerprint. You'll be able to get all this calculation. It will always be different depending of where you buy, what context, the maturity of this industry. And the name of the game is, to refine over time some of these calculation, not necessarily to get it 100% right. What's really important is measure for a purpose. So we try to measure to define levers. So we try to understand the amount of emissions to be able to spot what are the drivers of the emissions, what are the root causes that creates emissions. And out of this, we can develop levers, actions, roadmap that can help to reduce and decarbonize. So if you take a bottle of glass, maybe you'll be able to understand that there's a number of drivers for emission. The weight of the glass. The more you use glass on a bottle, well, the more you'll get emissions. Pretty obvious. Recycle glass. If you're making a bottle out of, glass that has already been used, you can lower rapidly the amount of emissions. But also, as part of the production process, there's elements of efficiency. For instance, you might be able to reuse the heat. You might be able to better organize the production process, so there's less emission there. And you can also have situations where, and for glass, the source of energy is quite important. So if they're using green energy, if there's a hydrogen supporting furnace, this can be an element of reduction here. So the whole purpose of measurements, it's like cost. We measure to try to understand what are the factors, what are the root cause of these emissions, and help us to take the right actions. Some of them we can maybe impact rapidly, the weight of the glass. Others, in the coming year, the amount of recycled glass used, and some can take more time because there's significant investment to be made. So that's really the logic. Measurement takes us to understand drivers, that helps us to understand the levers we can implement to reduce emissions. So what does it mean? Where do we use this emission driver? Well, back to the 3 paths. If we want to drive the change, and if we are designing or co-designing a product, we're going to be looking at these emission drivers, and with engineering, R&D, the supplier that we are going to involve, we're going to try what can be done to reduce the impact of these drivers. Maybe we'll be changing raw materials. Maybe we'll implement more circular logic. So, for instance, when Apple decided to design the latest version of the iPhone, they did a number of things. They had a collaboration with a company for the aluminium production and making sure they'd be able to get to access to green aluminium. This is a joint venture where Apple has been investing for new production process that are decarbonized. They'll be among the first to use this type of raw materials in the world, and it's important that this kind of solution can scale over time. But that wasn't enough. Apple has also been looking on how they can be reintegrated, some of the components and some of the raw materials into the production process. So actually, they've designed the phone so it's easier to get access to raw materials and reintegrate them into the production process. They actually developed two robots. One of them is called Daisy, that's able to dismantle an iPhone and help to recreate an access to the raw materials so this can be reintegrated into the production process. So leveraging the drivers, working on levers allows us to design new solutions. We need to be able to understand the impact, not to the complete real-time emissions, but being able to, hey, how much we could be saving on emissions if we go in the right direction. And we also need exactly the same type of logic for cost, because we have investment, we have situation where there's also the TCO that needs to be understood. So involve supplier in design decisions in order to make sure that our understanding of the emission drivers are right and that we can really get things implemented and reduce effectively. If we buy standard product from the market, we need to understand the drivers of emission fairly early stage. So even maybe before you start a procurement project, it's very useful to have some form of like a questionnaire. You can send a request for information related to decarbonation, a standard set of questions. You can have workshops, exchange with supplier. And that can help you to understand, already solutions identified, how things get measured, what might be possible in the future, things like this. And then you can start to organize your supplier selection process to take this into account. Let me give you an example. If you're buying office furniture, you might realize that there's an opportunity to rent instead of purchasing the office furniture. But that means that you need also to be able to monitor the assets you have inside your building and manage your subscription if you want to these office furniture. So, when you go to the market, then you can design requirements so you can also open the door to these types of solution. So supplier selection, important to pre-identify, explore a little bit the current situation in terms of standard product, what exists, doesn't exist, and be able to integrate some of these options into the way you design your requirements, but also supplier selection. Very important, be systematic. Integrate in every step of the process, requirements, selection criterion, contract, elements related to decarbonation. If you buy complex customized product, the first step is really to understand how things get measured. We talk about this, but also to be able to map over time when solutions, low carbon solutions, are going to appear, and how much of the impact, how much of this will be an investment. So technology will be emerging, will help to change the game in terms of carbon, but you need to be able to anticipate, see what's coming up, build a sort of roadmap, and make sure you jump on the right solution at the right time. There's plenty of cement factories. There's making big investments for on some energy for burning some stuff that's being recovered as part of some recycling process. I mean, this is very attractive because it shows you're making a first step, but end of the day, the complete impact is pretty limited. So very important to have ahead of time a plan and to understand if your suppliers have a complete plan to have really significant reduction. That's really what you want to achieve, being able to predict what's coming up. And then in some situation, going to the market, influencing it alone, or like the case of Apple, I mentioned about raw materials, or collaboration with key suppliers. When Apple wanted to have a decarbonized product, they jointly invested with some of their suppliers in green energy production, that would be available for their suppliers to decarbonize their production. So sometimes teaming up is the only way forward, even if you are a giant, like Apple, and you want to have a rapid impact. That's an absolute necessity. So the name of the game, anticipate, look at options. That's really the way forward in order to decarbonize more complex and customized type of services. I'm going to zoom on a number of points that are more about the procurement process. So first one, question I get very often is, what kind of procurement policies, code of conduct I need to have. I think the direction is very clear. Companies are going more and more into describing code of conduct as requirement. Interesting one from that point of view is the one from Bayer that clearly say suppliers are expected to set targets in terms of greenhouse gas emission reduction, and they need to have ambitious target by 2025. Ambitious is still ambiguous, I would say, but that sets a direction that something is already expected, and it shouldn't be like a small number, and that they should have a net zero, so decarbonizing the industry target with a roadmap for 2050 overall. So you see, it's not just about you shall not do anything, that's going to be harming the environment, or you try to minimize your impact. Requirement in code of conduct are more and more integrating this type of stronger requirements and expectations. Good. That gives you an idea on how to update your code of conduct. Not bad already. Then you need to integrate decarbonation into a number of things, requirements, awarding criterion. So remember what I've been talking about, emission drivers. We measure so we can understand what are the root causes, what are the factors that create these emissions. And it's one possibility to say, you need to reduce your emissions, but it might be a better way to really say, hey, we're buying glass. So what we want is you to use more recycled glass, or we want you as a supplier to implement a roadmap of investment. So you're going to change the energy mix that you're using for your factories. So that can go into requirements, that can be integrated into criterion that relates to sustainability into your selection process. Interesting case, Vodafone company, procurement company, has already integrated a 20% evaluation criteria on purpose, sustainability, and part of it, 5%, relates to carbon reduction, renewable energy, plastic reduction, circular economy, and the overall life cycle impact. So we're getting more and more into a situation where all of these are really factored into decision making, not simply on an occasional basis, but as something systematic, always applied to whatever purchase we make. And I think, that's an important way forward. Having it in a clause and contract, that's important as well. I think keep things quite simple. Make sure that you can gain access to some of the measurements, that they should be able to communicate on their greenhouse gas emission. Also, I would integrate in contract some things related to deviation. If a supplier does a change that's really impacting on the emission at product level as being shipped to you, then I think you should expect them to communicate and give you a warning about some of these changes and explain why. And I think that's one of the things you can integrate in a contract. Informing user. So sometime, like many things we do in procurement, it all starts with stakeholders, their requirements, their policies. So very important is, if you start going into carbon reduction, if you start to go into decarbonation levels, you need to make sure that your stakeholder have a policy that's supportive of going in this direction, and that you've got the right alignment at the level of the company. If you have a fleet of vehicles, if you have marketing policies, they should have some, guidelines about these topics. Otherwise, it's going to be a bit challenging, and alignment is necessary here. It's also important because, a lot of the things that are going to be a lot of the product you procure, the point of decision in terms of the purchase, is going to be with the users. So imagine, someone buying something from a catalog, from a marketplace, or, from a vending machine in a factory. Well, it's really important that policies applied to the choice of what's on the catalog, vending machine, but also that information is provided to the user and potentially providing comparisons between the price, but also the emissions and maybe other sustainability impact of some of these products. So the user side is really important. It's not just about the supplier side, but you know that. Measuring progress could be about measuring, CO2 equivalent emissions, but also you can look into some of the emission drivers, as I've been describing before, as a sort of a evolution over time. So maybe if we buy glass, next year we need to have, 60% of recycled glass, and the year after 70%, 80%. I don't know. I'm not a specialist of glass, but that can be a way of measuring progress over times in terms of reduction, and getting some information from the supplier that helps you to compare reality to what was expected. So that's really for that's really for integrating everything into the procurement process, from the policy to the requirement to the selection criterion to the contract, the user policies and decision-making process, and finally the measurement of performance. So always have these drivers in mind as an alternative to simply trying to measure impact. In terms of levers, I'm not going to give you a full class on what kind of levers you can use. There's so many kind of acronyms and so many techniques that have been described. Circular economy, regenerative, blue planet, cradle to cradle. It gets a bit complicated. So trying to put something fairly simple on a one-page perspective, and the logic looks at what is it that you purchase. So that's easier for you to enter into these levers depending of where you are. So if you buy energy or heat, you'll be able to tackle decarbonation potentially by using some of the levers at the bottom. If you raw materials, then you start to have a few more levers that you can be using, but you still have energy and heat as being important because that's part of the production process for the raw materials. So everything below is still valid for raw materials. Level up, you go to the level of a product, component, equipment, and then you get a few more levers you can integrate, and still all the other ones are valid. Then services, infrastructure, assets, and system, you've got a very complete list here. That's probably going to be part of a roadmap you're going to discuss with supplier. So if you buy a product or a piece of equipment you're going to be using in an office or a factory or anywhere, well, you've got a number of levers you could be looking into. And this kind of frameworks can help you with identifying the right one. But the true decision-making factor is understanding the emission driver. So if the product is the glass bottle that I've mentioned before, you can switch to green energy, the production process on supplier side. You can reuse the heat as part of the production process, or you can use more recycled raw materials, recycled glass into this process. So that's here some of the levers that are aligned with the emission drivers we've already mentioned. You won't pick all of them. In many situations, shortening supply chain can have an impact. Other situation, that won't be, massively impactful in terms of the decarbonation. So think with data, make sure you got your emissions and you're able to identify the drivers so you can use the right levers. Now, what's really important is being able to scale, okay? If everything you buy for your company has plenty of different raw materials, and for each thing you buy, one by one, you need to make a change of raw material, it's gonna take you a lot of time. Huh? So some companies, for instance, to help with scaling the change, they've taken all their specification for packaging, for instance. I know a food company, they've done that. And then they went to the whole market in terms of packaging and raw materials in order to identify alternatives. So widespread search for new opportunities in terms of low carbon alternatives. It provides a big message to the supplier that we're looking for something that makes a difference, and there's really a company decision behind it. So that's a way of scaling the impact. And we have a number of things that can make a difference here. Buying solutions, the case of renting, for instance, the office furniture, because that fosters circularity. This obliges the supplier to take back and therefore do some work in terms of reintegrating product or materials into the economy. Cross-category initiatives, raw materials, you might be looking at different segments and in one go, having a market consultation. Maybe you can work with supplier or buyer in order to influence a market. And there's broader ecosystem initiative, and I'll be sharing a couple with you very soon. The idea is really to think differently over time. We need to move from a logic, it's going to cost more, to a logic, how we get the best of both worlds. So how midterm, long-term, we can move in a positive dynamics where we can both reduce cost and reduce carbon by finding the right solution that are going to make a difference. And we need to move from project by project or a single category to a cross-category perspective to make some of these effects the most powerful possible and impactful possible, so we make quick progress in the right direction. Examples of this more ecosystems approach and cross-category approach: a company in the water industry, they have a lot of these water infrastructure equipment, and they've been moving to switch raw materials, metallic ones, for composite materials or polymer. They've done that in mass. They've validated the new raw materials with the authorities and the test lab, but they've also worked with their supplier and sub-tier supplier in order to ensure that the new raw materials are delivering the job. It wasn't just about the carbon impact, but this was also about the possibility to recycle some of the raw materials, especially the polymer. It was about extending the life cycle and resistance to chemical. It's less weight, so it was positive in terms of health and safety, and improvement in terms of work condition. Overall, by looking at a very large spectrum, they've been able to get positive TCO impact on some of the changes. This wasn't, maybe very, the return on investment was limited, but on other, it was actually a good one. So, when you look in mass, you can make these changes and you're able to really have big impact without having major changes in terms of cost. Another case I kind of like is the one of a company in Portugal called Sograp. They produce wine in glass bottle. And I've been talking a lot to you about, glass. It's an easy case to share. And when the procurement manager, a lady, went to the supplier of the glass bottle, they asked, can you increase the amount of recycled glass you use? And the producer said, well, this will cost more money. But why? This is recycled glass. Why is this going to cost money? Well, because we might need to import it, because in Portugal, we don't have very high level of recycling for glass. So instead of looking at it as, oh, there's a tension, there's a contradiction, the idea is, how do we improve? How do we change that? How we build an ecosystem working with distributor, working in the end with tourist agencies, with association for bars and small restaurants, to help them increase the level of recycling they have in these business activities, and make sure that this can increase over time. They got money from European Union in order to support this circular investment. And now there's a whole association that's aiming to have 90% of glass collections for recycling. So moving from not simply looking at the supply market, but initiating changes that's really happening here, on both sides, client side, supply side, but the whole society as well. So, of course, it's not the job of the procurement person to do that till the end. But in this case, the person had the, leadership and entrepreneurship spirit to, get it started, push for this type of ecosystem. So that's, the kind of scaling we need into the future, this ability to think, beyond our classic one-to-one relationship in supply chain, to see the bigger picture in order to make these impacts. So, yeah, Maxi, maybe, I've been going on. So I don't know if you want to, highlight some points or react or share examples. I think we've covered a lot of content already. So
I think we have.
Pause.
Now, I think the content is very, very insightful. And I think the research is very important for us as a procurement function or profession. Because one, I think it tells us that we actually can't think in our existing ecosystem. Yeah, when it comes to category management, we think in categories, but we actually have to think cross categories. We've got to think cross boundaries. The suppliers and a supply-based pool, they are one part of the ecosystem. So we really need to tap into that in the wider context, but we also need to think about all the other players in the ecosystem and combine that. So bring that together. And I think also the levels we discussed, or you discussed earlier, I think they actually are super important help and toolkit for us, because it helps us to translate corporate strategies into what does it actually mean for procurement and me as an individual. So I think I just think we need to probably change the way we work, but also become more embedded in the business, more embedded in the industries we're working in, more embedded in the ecosystem we work in. So I'm very excited about this whole research.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think there's there's some easy next steps and there's some obvious next steps, but I think in terms of leadership, in terms of thinking, beyond the scope that we are looking at currently, this is going to be very important for procurement to. Yeah, one of the picture I take is we've been used to look at markets with, very closely.
Yeah.
And then probably we need to take this binocular and turn them back. So now we can see them from far, look at all the interconnections across, and being able to understand all the industry connections that needs to evolve, like the one we were talking about, recycled glass, in order to make good change happen.
Yeah.
So stepping back instead of trying always to be more and more precise, or more specifically, probably, stepping back and then going into details and stepping back again and going into details. That's going to be one of the key skills to go from micro to micro, micro to macro, to be able to, lead some of this change and make a difference here. I'm trying to, already provide a number of yeah, maybe we'll send some of them by so I gave you a link for Gabisfera, but I'm gonna try to find the other one. If you have any question, very happy to try to answer some of your questions while I'm still, looking for some of these tools, that can be used. So here is a second one. That's another one you can use for getting access to some of the data. And again, this landscape of accessing data information related to decarbonation keeps growing every day. Get in touch with your industry association, ask them for, if there's any development about common measurement, standards for measuring carbon. For instance, in telecom, they've got some joint initiatives. In train industry, rail industry, they have some joint initiative. If you look at chemical industry, you've got Together for Sustainability. They have guidelines that are open source that can be used to measure emissions, and they're piloting solutions for data exchange on this. So, look around for industry solution as well, providing you some of the more generic universal tool that, use some very classic source of open data for this type of things. So, any questions we got? No, I think good. So, 57, I'm sure we're going to be talking again soon about decarbonation. Probably good to, keep going in this direction, having a webinar every year on the topic, and, investing more in collecting best practice. So I need you to send me your problems, to send me your questions, so we can keep digging and looking for solutions, making them accessible for people in procurement. And then, hopefully seeing you in the future at an EIPM webinar, so we can help you go further, leverage new practice. We've got public course coming in October on the topic. We've got possibility of putting together more customized program for training to initiate the change. And we currently have a working group of companies on decarbonation. So if you have an interest, again, don't hesitate to contact us. And hopefully, you'll be able to take a few key things and bring that back and start, implementing, going in the right direction. Thank you, Maxi, for being with us. It's been a pleasure to see you.
Thank you, Harry, as always.
Goodbye, everyone.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.